All right, it's time to talk the Ravens with Kevin Oestreicher with Locked On Ravens. And Kevin, man, you do a great job covering this team. And I would say at the top of the list, if there's a top 5 team that you want to cover for draft coverage, the Ravens got to be it. This team is unbelievable. They're adaptable. They're flexible. They're consistently filling their need, yet they'll go for the top player if they need to. They'll move up. They'll move down. You just don't know what they're going to do. But almost consistently, at the end of it, when they're being graded out by all kinds of experts and analysts, it's always a B or better. I mean, am I wrong? I mean, the way this team just works, it's really, they've got a great system and they follow it every year for the draft.
Yeah, they do a great job of not just drafting for need, but making sure that if they have a guy highly rated on their board that might not necessarily be the biggest need or the second biggest need on their team, they will look towards the future of the position. A couple recent examples of that, J.K. Dobbins back in 2020 when the Ravens had Gus Edwards and Mark Ingram already, spending a second-round pick on a running back seemed like it wasn't a great investment for a lot of people. But for myself and others who did understand what they were doing there, now Mark Ingram has departed, and Dobbins obviously had the ACL injury, so we didn't get to see him last season. But that was an example of that. Marlon Humphrey, same thing. When the Ravens had Jimmy Smith and the cornerback room was a strength of that team, they bring in Marlon Humphrey. Now he's one of the best in this league. But now in a draft class, I mean, 2022, this draft class is so unique and so deep at so many positions. The Ravens have 10 draft picks, 9 in the first 4 rounds. They have a lot of ammunition to move up, down, or just stay put and take some really good players.
I'm going to age myself. I'm a dinosaur. Was covering the team the very first year that they came 27 years ago. So that first draft 26 years ago, number 4, Jonathan Ogden, number 26, Ray Lewis. I don't think I can remember them drafting as high as number 4 ever again, because they're always in the middle or late in the rounds because you usually have a winning record. You know, for this team, though, that's kind of a perfect example, right, where they can just go and get what they need. They've ended up jumping up for Lamar Jackson and adapting their whole offense as to what he does. So there's been rumors about trading down. They could potentially stockpile some stuff. What is your feeling about early on in this draft for the Ravens that you think they might do?
Yeah, for this team, it feels like they could do so many different things. Because you're right, 14 is a pick where we don't usually see them at. Where, for example, they had 6 where they took Ronnie Stanley, but usually it's in the 20s, like mid-20s, late 20s, even the 30s sometimes when the Ravens get deep into the playoffs. So 14 gives them a ton of different avenues to explore, especially when looking at the potential trade down possibilities where they could pick up an extra second-round pick or maybe 2 late first-round picks. I know the Kansas City Chiefs with their 29 and 30 are a popular trade down candidate for some teams in the mid-teens, but they could also potentially trade up. This is a year where, for example, last year when the Ravens had 27, they couldn't make a move up into the top 7 because that would just cost them a fortune. But now at 14, there's a little bit more leeway to that. So if Kayvon Thibodeau falls or a guy like Trayvon Walker, et cetera, those top flight prospects you're kind of thinking will go in the top 3, top 5. If those guys fall into the top 7, top 8, top 10, the Ravens could look to make a move up because this is a year where I think they should capitalize on having that 14th pick. And whether they just want to wait it out and stay at 14, they have a couple needs that there could be some players at in that mid-teens area that could really fit them and do a lot of good work for them, not even just at the position, but also the versatility that a lot of these players have.
Man, it does seem shocking. Number 14, that is not a place they're usually at. But, you know, this is a team that lost momentum down the stretch, right? And it's really only a few successful 2-point attempts in some key times from really winning some ball games, potentially winning the division. And oh, lo and behold, the AFC North champion made it to the Super Bowl. So this is not a team in decline. This was a team that just didn't get a lot of breaks last year, especially when you consider they threw off the injury curve completely. It's like a college professor. They threw the curve off. They had so many injuries last year. So with that being said, you get deeper into the rounds, day 2, day 3. This isn't a team in decline, so they're going to be looking to pick off some guys and some value. Let's get into day 2 and day 3. What do you think they're going to do and how they're going to play it? What kind of position needs do you think they'll go for? Maybe a surprise or 2.
Yeah, it feels like to me, if the Ravens go for an edge in round 1, I feel like corner will become a huge priority for them in days 2 and 3. They lost a lot of their depth pieces, still have Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, but those guys are coming off of major injuries, and the rest of their depth from 2021 is pretty much all gone to other teams. So they could look there. If the Ravens do address corner in the first round, I think edge is a position that becomes kind of the top flight need for them because Tyus Bowser, you mentioned injury-riddled season. Tyus Bowser tears his Achilles in Week 18, so the last possible game. So it just was a bitter end to a pretty brutal injury season for them. They have Odafe Owe out of Penn State, who is a player who had a pretty good rookie season, all things considered. Started off scorching, kind of cooled off a little bit towards the end, missed the final couple games there, but they have him, Dalen Hayes as well, another now second-year player. But again, they just don't have a lot there at the moment. Justin Houston's still a free agent. They have Jalen Ferguson on the team still, but he hasn't really done a ton ever since breaking Terrell Suggs' FBS sack record in college. So those are a couple positions where I think are the biggest needs. Also, offensive tackles, another, with the uncertain health of Ronnie Stanley. The team has to invest there, and they've made it pretty clear that even if they have to overinvest in the position, it was a pretty big shock last year to a lot of people that they did not take an offensive tackle in that draft, nor did they take a defensive tackle. So I think those are two other positions to look at. Maybe if the board falls a certain way, Jordan Davis is the pick at 14, and then you have corner and edge to address in round 2, round 3, round 4, et cetera. So those are kind of the four I'm looking at. Other sneaky needs include inside linebacker, running back, tight end. They don't need a quarterback. They have Lamar Jackson. The safety position is pretty good right now with the addition of Marcus Williams. But all in all, I feel like corner and edge and offensive tackle are the three big ones they need to address.
Not only do they have a successful draft system, they've done a great job with their free agents, not overpaying guys, knowing when to let guys go and let another team pay them that big second contract. You know, they put a value on players that are there and are important Monday through Saturday as much as they are on Sunday. And when they draft a guy, Kevin, they expect them to get into that lineup at some point, especially the guys that are taken early on in the draft. As you mentioned, Odafe Owe got plenty of playing time. So, you know, with all that said, look, Big Ben's no longer in the division, so he exits, but Deshaun Watson enters. So it's one of those things like, do you go for offensive line play so you can control the ball a little bit more and keep it out of the hands of these quarterbacks? Or do you go ahead and you try and invest in the secondary so that you can stop guys like Deshaun Watson? Of course, Joe Burrow threw it all day on him last year. So they have a lot to consider, but I think those are the two areas that they're going to want to shore up, is so they can control the ball offensively and then also defend some of these elite passers that are now in the division.
Yeah, it feels like with the quarterbacks in this division now, and especially with some of the wide receivers coming in, you have Amari Cooper coming into Cleveland, and obviously Jamar Chase did some not nice things to the Ravens if you're a Ravens fan in 2021.
You're putting it mildly.
Right. Yeah, you have to look at that 200-yard game and say, how can we stop this guy? And look, the Bengals have earned that respect. You know, they played a very good year last year, and especially against Baltimore. It feels like the Ravens in this secondary now, considering how bad it was in 2021, and obviously that has to do with a couple things, right? Injuries, there were miscommunications in the back end. Those are things that they should have shored up by the time 2022 rolls around. I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't, but they just need the bodies there. You know, two cornerbacks right now who it feels like are the stars of that room, and then just guys who were 6-stringers, 7-stringers last year. So if they can sign a veteran and draft two guys, or sign two veterans and draft a guy there, then they will have quality depth alongside the star players, which they would have had in 2021 had Marcus Peters not gone down. And then that just kind of throws the rest of the secondary out of disarray. And on the offensive line, you're right. You know, if Lamar Jackson has time to throw in the pocket, we see what he can do. He is a good passer, a good thrower. He's a great one. And we saw that a little bit earlier on in the season. I mean, I think people forget this team started 8-3 and we're at the top of the AFC through 12 weeks, which was just, it was flabbergasting. I mean, literally, because of everything that they went through. Now, admittedly, they had a much easier first half of the schedule than they did in the second half, and I think that showed. But you mentioned that they were just a couple 2-point conversions away from probably making the playoffs. Is a team that was just decimated all season long. So if Jackson has that time to throw, the Indianapolis game comes to mind as a game where he did have that time in the second half of that game, and he put up Madden video game-like numbers. So if you can balance it out, maybe address the corner in the first, offensive tackle in the second, throw some edge guys in there, it feels like this team will be a lot more balanced, especially with the guys coming back who, you know, I argue are free agent additions in their own.
Yeah, you know, and you mentioned wide receiver, and I think Ravens fans just kind of had a chill run through them when they think of Jamar Chase and then Amari Cooper coming to Cleveland. I mean, that's quite a duo with Watson and Cooper now with Cleveland. That's a position, if there is a criticism, that's a position the Ravens haven't had a great deal of success with through the years. Rashad Perriman, probably one of their bigger busts in the draft years ago. And then, look, we've seen Rashad Bateman. That guy's he's got talent. So I'm really intrigued by what he can do in year two. You know, as Penn State covering them here up in our area, we saw a lot of him with Minnesota, and he's effective and he can get the job done both, you know, volume wise and take the top off the defense. So wide receiver, do you think they're going to, this is a deep class. Where do you think they might go and reach to grab? And I don't mean reach, I mean when they're going to go and select someone what round and potential any bodies that you're looking at?
Yeah, this has been a very hot topic of debate, especially because over the past 3 seasons, so 2019, 2020, 21, the Ravens have taken 2 wide receivers in each of those drafts, so 6 total. They just let go of Miles Boykin, who ended up getting claimed off of waivers by the Pittsburgh Steelers. But it feels like now with the Ravens, they have the 5 that they drafted. It feels like they could add one more in the draft. And whether that comes in the first round, I feel like that's a pretty unlikely scenario just because they have bigger needs elsewhere, talking about edge and corner and offensive tackle, et cetera. But in the second round, there are guys like George Pickens, Christian Watson. In the mid rounds, you have other really solid options as well. But there is a specific profile I think this team should be looking for. And it is kind of that big bodied type player, can win in contested catch situations. They have the speedsters and the crisp route runners and guys who can make you pay deep. But I feel like if you can add that contested catch guy, and not even forgetting about Mark Andrews, who is kind of that, but he's a tight end. So if you can add another wide receiver to complement Andrews, I think that's where they would go. So I wouldn't be shocked if they take a wide receiver in the second round. I feel like the more likely scenario is probably on day 3, but there are talented wide receivers throughout all 3 days of the draft. And, wherever they take one, it feels like they probably will end up, if they do keep 10 draft picks, with one of those being a wide receiver.
Well, we mentioned this is a team, a couple successful 2-point conversions away from really being in it, 8-3 to start. And whenever you got Justin Tucker on your roster, man, you just keep the game close, and somehow you're gonna pull out some W's. Kevin, I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the 3 days. I know you're amped up and ready to go. I hope to talk with you soon after it's all over, but really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Todd. This was great.